Are you on Team PlayStation or Team Xbox? Why does it seem like everybody has a Switch regardless? Remember the times that you could easily buy pirated CDs, or even the days you buy a whole new console for just one single game? Well, today, let's rewind the time back to the 1970s and walk through the history of video game consoles by generations. At the dawn of time, there was nothing. Then, suddenly, the first generation consoles appeared. I'm sure some of you remember the popular ones like Pong, the table tennis, and obviously those consoles look so simple and old today, where most of them literally had two colors and can only play one game. Can you imagine today that most of us have at least dozens of games? So you need to buy a whole new console for each game. How much space would you need on your TV stand? But wait. Let me think. I sense something familiar though, because those special edition consoles today, they try to sell you and sell you and sell you again. Feels a little bit like that, right? Or at least they get your money that way. Alright, there's really nothing super exciting about the first gen consoles, except the fact that they started the creative and exciting modern gaming voyage. The second generation consoles came out and were dramatically improved. This time around, you had multiple colors, better games, with somewhat recognizable images, and finally, cartridges. So you could have dozens of games to play without buying dozens of consoles. Unlike in the first gen, this time we had a few strong players, like Atari 2600, the ColecoVision, and the Intellivision, which is my favorite. By the way, if you're interested in a deeper dive in the Intellivision, click on the link above for my review on it. Now, in the first generation, there wasn't a clear winner in the console wars, but this time around, Atari absolutely crashed the competition in terms of sales. It sold over 30 million, which is more than 10 times of the second player. Mostly due to the fact that it was the first to the market, so no wonder even today, PlayStation and Xbox are all furiously competing to launch new generations around the same time frame, right? In terms of the state of the games market at the time, it's worth calling out that it became overly saturated with crappy games, and the video game market crashed, mostly due to many inexperienced third-party developers rushing into the space and developed a bunch of low-quality and cheap games, like E.T. It was so bad that the video game sales fell by a whopping 97% from 1983 to 1985. But there's light at the end of the tunnel, because there was the start of the third-gen consoles. Like a phoenix rising from the ashes of the video game crash, the Nintendo Entertainment System, aka NES, breathed new life into the video game market. The NES launched in 1983 in Japan and made its way to America in 1985, where it was massively popular, selling more than 65 million consoles. Sega also came out with Sega Master System, which was a direct competitor, but didn't sell nearly as well. With the more powerful 8-bit processor support, the third generation console games become leaps and bounds larger and better. Check out how much better the sprites and the background look compared to Atari games. And most importantly, classic games like Mario, Sonic, Zelda, and Castlevania also started emerging. By the end of the third generations, some developers were so creative at pushing the limits that a few games could be confused with a 16-bit game. Possibly the best example here is Batman: Return of the Joker. This game used a bunch of tricks to make the background scroll super well, had a super detailed characters, and so much smooth control. Only the sprite flickering and the music in the background gave it away as an NES game. This was truly the start of an era where games were much more advanced and still resemble many games being made today. I would go on and say, the third gen was one of the most critical milestones for the ever-evolving video game console journey. Next came the fourth generations of consoles, which was mostly led by the availability of 16-bit processors. The competition this time around was largely a duel between Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo Entertainment System (SNES). This was considered the golden age of 2D gaming due to the capabilities of both systems. However, while both systems have their strengths, I think the 4th gen console wars are not nearly as interesting as the 3rd gen, so let's not spend too much time there. The bottom line to remember here is the SNES ended up selling 3 times as much as the Sega Genesis, and is still thought to be one of the most classic video game consoles that's worth having. And now finally, with the launch of more powerful CPUs and graphic processors, 3D gaming has arrived with the 5th gen consoles. Plus, the CD-ROMs, which is a truly total game changer for the gaming industry. Remember the days you were exchanging games with friends? Or maybe even buying pirated discs from a fraction of the cost? CDs made games so much more accessible and stimulated the video game adoptions by leaps and bounds. The major 5th generation consoles are Sony PlayStation 1, the Nintendo 64, and the Sega Saturn. Clearly, without actual introduction, you know who won the 5th generation console war, right? The PlayStation, of course. You might ask, why Sony did not get into this gig sooner? Well, in fact, the PlayStation wasn't Sony's first attempt to get into the video game industry. They were actually working with Nintendo on a Super Nintendo with a disk drive when Nintendo decided to abandon the project. So who's to say Sony didn't decide to create their own console out of spite? Even though there were already 2 very strong players, Nintendo and Sega, Sony joined the fray and outsold both by a hefty margin, more than doubling the competition combined. So what are the main reasons that make Sony's PlayStation take the crown at the very first try? Number 1. Sony attracted more developers onto their platform to write more games and build a richer ecosystem as they supported writing games using C language, while Nintendo and Sega games mostly require assembly. Number 2. Sony games are often cheaper due to the cost of CDs. Both Sony and Sega chose CD-ROMs, but Nintendo chose cartridges. Games on CD were cheap to produce, costing about $1 to manufacture rather than $30 it cost for Nintendo to make an N64 cartridge, where the cost will also pass down to the consumers. Let's talk about N64 a little bit more. So why is it considered one of the most sought-after systems when it comes to the retro gaming collectors, rather than PlayStation? Well, I think the N64 had some truly fantastic first and second-party games, like Mario 64, GoldenEye, The Ocarina of Time, Mario Kart, Banjo-Kazooie, Super Smash Bros. Which one don't you love and still play today? The list just goes on and on. N64 also had 4 controller ports, which is a huge plus for multiplayer games. It's really the console you chose when you want to have fun with friends. Now after the smashing success of the PlayStation, Sega and Nintendo really felt that they had to up their game in order to compete with Sony in the 6th generation. So what happened in the 6th generation? And what moves did Sega and Nintendo each do to save themselves? When did the Xbox came into the picture? I know, seriously, what was Microsoft doing? It was 2000s already. If you want to learn what happened next, please stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks for watching and hope to see you soon. As always, I'm your host Little Bear. Until next time, signing off.
Something's gone.